So, when you hear someone talk about a literal interpretation of the Bible, you probably have a pretty clear idea of what that means. But what if I told you that for the very first Christians, the word literal meant something totally different? Something filled with mystery and power. Let's dive into how they read a text they believed was a direct message from God. Okay, so first things first, we have to kind of throw our modern assumptions out the window for a bit. When we talk about reading something literally today, we mean taking it at face value, right? Simple. But for ancient readers, that was really just the starting point of the whole adventure. So that's the big question, isn't it? How did the earliest Christians read their scriptures? Did they read it literally? Well, yes, they did, but what they meant by that word is probably going to surprise you. And here is the absolute core difference. For us, literal means the simple, obvious, surface-level meaning. But for them, the literal text, the letter on the page, was a divine message. Every single word, the way the sentences were arranged, it was all thought to be infused with a kind of supernatural power. This wasn't just ink on a page. This was a sacred object. Let's dig into that idea a little more. This incredible reverence for the written word itself, what they actually called the litera, or the letter, that was the foundation for everything that came after. So here's the key thing to get. The litera wasn't just about the plain meaning. It was the physical text itself, seen as God's direct line of communication. They believed divine mysteries were literally woven into the fabric of the text, so trying to understand it correctly was a deeply spiritual act. And, they believed God actually wanted to be understood. As one 4th century writer we call Ambrosiaster put it, the basic story was usually pretty clear. It wasn't hidden by a bunch of fancy literary tricks. Most of the time, they figured the divine author was being straight with them. But, and there's always a but, right? This is where things get really interesting. Because that deep respect for the letter started to run into some serious problems. What happens when the plain, simple meaning just doesn't make any sense? This forced these early interpreters to identify 3 specific kinds of problems. 3 challenges where the literal text just seemed to fail. And that demanded they find a way to read even deeper. First up, what they called the foreign letter. I mean, just imagine trying to read a text from a totally different time, a different culture, a different language. The Greek of the New Testament was full of Hebrew ways of speaking. The names were unfamiliar, and the cultural assumptions were completely alien to people living in the Roman Empire. There was this huge gap that had to be bridged somehow. Then you had problem number 2, the obscure letter. Sometimes the text was just confusing. A word could have 2 or 3 different meanings, or a weird grammatical twist could make the whole sentence foggy. The meaning wasn't from another culture, it was just hard to see clearly. And finally, we get to the real head-scratcher, the missing letter. This was for passages that, if you just read them at face value, seemed completely ridiculous, or theologically weird, or even morally wrong. In these cases, the interpreters decided the literal meaning must actually be missing, that it just wasn't the whole picture. And this is where a brilliant 3rd century scholar named Origen of Alexandria basically set the rule for everyone. He argued that you have to stick to the literal reading, unless doing so is logically unthinkable. For Origen, a passage like that was basically a sign from God, a little nudge saying, hey, you need to look higher. And Origen had tons of examples. I mean, how can God, who doesn't have a body, literally walk in a garden? How do you apply a tooth for a tooth to a newborn baby who doesn't even have teeth? Or was a Christian supposed to literally be rude and not greet anyone they meet on the road? For Origen, these were flashing neon signs that the letter alone wasn't the full story. So what do? I mean, this became the big puzzle. They couldn't just throw the text away. They believed it was from God. So how could they solve these tricky passages without deciding the whole thing was flawed? Well, their solution was, honestly, pretty ingenious. They didn't get rid of the text. Instead, they created a set of interpretive keys to unlock what they called the spiritual sense that was hiding just beneath the surface. And this is so important. They didn't see this as just making stuff up. They truly believed that God, the divine author, had intentionally woven a deeper spiritual layer of truth underneath the letter. So these tricky parts weren't mistakes. They were invitations to dig deeper. One of their most powerful keys was something called typology. The easiest way to think about it is like divine foreshadowing. They would look at a person, like Joseph, or an event, like the Exodus from Egypt,
and see them not just as history, but as types that pointed forward to and were fulfilled by Jesus in the church.
Another huge key was allegory. Now, while typology connects real events in history, allegory is a bit different. It's when the text says one thing but means another on a more symbolic level. It was a way to uncover a deeper moral or philosophical truth that might not have anything to do with the surface story at all. And if you're wondering where they got this idea, well, get this. They got it from the Bible itself. The Apostle Paul, writing in the New Testament, looks at the Old Testament story of Sarah and Hagar and says straight up, this is an allegory. He reads the two women not just as historical people, but as symbols for the two major covenants between God and humanity.
Okay, so that's a lot of ancient interpretation. Why does any of this matter to us now? Well, the legacy of this way of thinking is absolutely enormous. It didn't just shape religion, it shaped the whole of Western culture.
I mean, the impact was just huge. For starters, it wove the Old and New Testaments together into one single epic story. It also gave them a powerful toolkit for dealing with problematic passages without having to doubt the text's authority. This whole method became one of the main engines for shaping core Christian beliefs. And maybe most importantly, it turned the Bible from a static old book into a dynamic, living text that could speak directly to them. And this influence just spilled out everywhere. It didn't stop at the church doors. This whole idea of finding deeper symbolic layers of meaning hidden in a text became a cornerstone of Western literature, art, and philosophy for more than 1,000 years. Which really just leaves us with one final thought. Whether you're religious or not, this ancient way of reading kind of challenges all of us. What might we discover in any ancient text? A myth, a poem, a work of philosophy, if we allow ourselves to look for more than just the letter and start searching for the deeper story that it just might be trying to tell us.